Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an expert in human resources from the world of academia, from Idaho, USA, Dr. Rob Leon. Rob, welcome to the show.
Wonderful. Welcome. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm so happy to
Thank
be
you.
here.
Thank you. Dr. Leon is a professor of human resource development at the Idaho State University. He's also the principal of Black River Performance Management. So, Rob, my first question to you, you emphasize that work should fuel the human spirit, not drain it. How can leaders create environments that truly energize employees?
That's a great question. I'll start with this concept that I share with my clients, and it's this concept that I want my people or your people, your staff,
Mm,
to go home with enough fuel still in their energy reserves to be present with whatever it is they want to do in the evening, whether it's
mm,
family, volunteer, get to the gym. And so the implication for that is work has to have a positive effect on them,
mm,
right? Hopefully fun, lighthearted, but also challenging and invigorating.
mm,
And and how can leaders operationalize this? Well, it's tough to bring the best out of people when you don't know them very well.
mm,
And it's kind of like being there for a friend or significant other. If you don't do the work to get to know them, how
mm,
do you really align with them?
mm,
And we're not suggesting that leaders have to exhaust themselves getting to know people, but there's an element of just our humanity, our
mm.
interaction,
Yeah.
smiling and being together that
Mm,
is central to this. And taking time is one of the easiest ways leaders can do this.
mm,
Taking time just to check in and be very purposeful with their engagements with people.
mm.
And we have a new opportunity every time we onboard someone new to our
Yeah.
organization.
Mm,
And so oftentimes we get some feedback that, well, this seems like a lot of work to do with our team. Well, if
mm,
you've never done it, it is a lot of work to get
mm,
started. But
mm,
just think about it. You put that investment in, that time in, and it starts to do the work for you over
mm,
time. And
mm,
then now you're focusing more on your new employees, ensuring that they're socialized well, they feel integrated, and you have a better sense of what they're looking to accomplish here. It's a
mm,
great way to, after that heavy initial lift, to keep the system moving and cultivating the culture you're looking for.
Great response. You also discuss the dynamic art of leadership. How can
Mhm.
leaders move beyond rigid formulas and develop intuitive leadership?
Yeah, I think this reflects on, and I have a blog post coming out about this today. It reflects on kind of the life cycle of a leader.
Mm,
When we're new, we're just trying to find solutions and answers and frameworks.
mm,
And because most of us didn't go to school to be leaders, right?
yeah.
Most of us went to school to be maybe marketer or engineering, and that's our craft.
Mm,
So we start with these concepts that are really kind of purposeful, but kind of black and white, like
mm,
start to do this, don't do this. It's very
mm,
linear at the initial moving on,
yeah.
but we have to mature over time and develop more sophistication
Mm,
because in our leadership practices in and of itself, so that we can provide that differentiated support, so
mm,
that I know you from our interactions and I can be there to support you for what you need so
mm,
that you can really thrive and be in states of flow and just immerse yourselves in the work. And,
mm,
and when that happens, beautiful things happen with the team because the team starts leaning in
mm,
and they start picking up the load and assisting each other. And what that leader does is that leader role models that differentiation approach with everyone.
mhm,
And then people start to pick that up to see, look, I'm not treating everyone the same also. I'm treating everyone according to how they want to be treated.
mm,
And and that's kind of where that comes in. So it's really tough at the get-go, I think, for many leaders to move into this space. But as you become more comfortable with that role of
yeah.
leadership and that practice of leadership,
Mm,
it's at that point we get to be a little bit more creative and take next steps to go deeper with
mm,
our people.
Well said. You've also written about feedback equals love, accountability equals respect. How
Yeah.
can leaders balance empathy with accountability?
Oh, I don't think they're mutually exclusive, right?
Hmm.
So without empathy, it's hard to have a level of connection.
Yeah.
And when we talk about accountability, one of the things we have to acknowledge on accountability, it might be difficult for me to hold someone accountable because I'm just not comfortable, but it's really difficult for them to hear that information sometimes, to
Mm.
receive that feedback, and it stings.
Right.
And so if I come across as very rigid and non-caring, low on the empathy piece, then my feedback may not land, that accountability conversation may not land in a way that that person accepts it and
Mm.
integrates it. We always talk about this. Feedback stings. Like, it's tough to hear, even though you know you deserve it, right?
Yeah.
There's an element of self that it's like, oh, I don't like that he told me that. But if you take a couple moments and pause and reflect, it's like,
Mm.
yeah, but I needed to hear that because I
Mm.
needed to make these changes because I want
Absolutely.
to do better.
Yeah. Absolutely. Rob, you also have a 5I engagement model, which
Hmm.
focuses on unlocking employee potential.
Hmm.
What are the biggest barriers to engagement today?
So, one of the biggest barriers to engagement, and this relates to that model, this relates to this blog post. Let me set this up for you. It's this concept that delegation is not effective in creating engagement.
Mm.
What happens when we delegate things, we're imposing things on people. But going back to what I said in terms of that leadership lifestyle cycle, that early on we learn you must delegate so that you're A, not micromanaging, and B, sharing the load. But as you transition, you need to move outside of that. So one of the things that blocks that potential, in my opinion, is the leader. And I know we parse these words. What is a leader versus what is a manager? But what happens in many instances is leaders become managers of experience, and they're not in this facilitation role. And
Mm.
this is what kind of chokes this up, is
Mm.
that if I'm managing, delegating, assigning, I think I'm creating the conditions for people to be successful, but I'm actually not letting them to be a part of that decision-making process. So that
Mm.
5I engagement model really speaks to this process of moving from this leader that manages the environment to the leader that facilitates the environment so people could lean in and leverage their purpose, find their alignment, and do their piece of the puzzle as it relates to the task at hand.
Amazing. Rob, I've also seen many companies struggle with retaining top talent.
Mhm.
What role does culture play in retention, and what strategies work the best?
Sure, culture's huge in retention, right? So why are people leaving? Why is this top talent leaving?
Mm.
At some point it's because new opportunities are better opportunities,
Sure.
right? But we remove those off the table because there's a lot of top talent that are just leaving the organization because they might be feeling like people are piling on the work because they're high performers,
Mm.
whereas others are maybe social loafing and that they're not doing their fair share.
Mm.
And so, what culture does, in my opinion, is it becomes this grease for
Mm.
the gears of the organization. And it makes it that much easier to have conversations about such things as unfair treatment, such
Mm.
things as psychological safety. Look, one of the things we see with psychological safety, and it's an iterative process, is that
Mhm.
it exists because people weren't talking to each other,
Mm.
and there's power elements there. Well, if we increase the quality and the caliber of the culture, people feel like they have more of a voice to have these discussions so that they could constantly, like I said, iteratively reform and refine the process. So it's not uncommon for our clients that have these rich culture experiences in these
Mm.
organizations to pause and say, the leader says, "Can you give me some feedback?"
Mm.
And the people feel empowered and supported to say, "You know what? I find that you've become a little bit more overbearing in our conversations. Maybe you're
Mhm.
cutting us off. We're not getting to finish what we're saying, and that's causing us to pull back."
Mhm.
And so integrating pieces like that helps strengthen that system
Mhm.
so that we can do what we want to do. And it's like a puzzle. It's like puzzle work, right? They all fit together, and it
Mm.
relates to onboarding, and it even relates to pre-hire, how you're structuring and staturing your position, and
Mm.
then integrating concepts of fit. And then as we get into the onboarding, not just onboarding for benefits and pay, but
Yeah.
socialization and then cultural fit elements, pieces
Mm.
like that.
Mm.
It's it's a great process in order to kind of raise the standard.
Mm.
And when people are happy and those A players are sticking around
Mm.
and it's a positive environment, the organization is going to be more successful get
Correct.
around its performance measures. Not
Mm.
to mention what we also see as a byproduct of this
Yeah.
is that people that are low performers, when they're in an environment that supports the A performers, the A level people, and they have tight community within this culture,
Hmm.
those low performers start to realize that they can't do this anymore. They don't fit in this organization, that
Mm.
maybe they're trying to bring some drama or put people against each other, but there's so
Mm.
much integrity in the system that they don't
Mm.
get any space to do that. So eventually what they learn is they learn that they don't have ears that people are listening to them on
Said.
to distract them, and so they
Mm.
they move on.
Absolutely. And one more question relating to culture. What are some early warning signs of a toxic workplace culture? And how can leaders
Sure.
address this?
I think one easy sign that many don't look for
Mm.
is when someone's leading a staff meeting
Mm.
and they ask for participation,
Mm.
there's no response.
Mm.
It's very quiet.
Mm.
And that is often tied to low levels of psychological safety. So if I'm leading a group or if I'm with a client observing a group, I'll take note of that people are not speaking up for whatever the reason is, and
Mm.
we'll begin to unpack that. The element of blame is a good sign here too. In
Mm.
toxic cultures, there's more blame occurring as opposed to ownership,
Mhm.
owning it, or even just remedying it so we don't even get
Mm.
to the point of blame.
Right.
Those are two really, really easy,
Mm.
really simple things to recognize. And then from there, we start to build out our systems.
Mm. Well said. You also talk about meeting people where they are.
Yeah,
What does this mean? And give me an example of
sure.
how one can meet people where they are.
You have such a great set of questions that
Mm.
really integrate this cultural fabric, right? Like, so
Mm.
meeting people where they are is essential, going right back to our first question about how work should fuel the human spirit, right?
Right.
Like, if I don't know you,
Mm.
then I can't do these things to support you in the ways you want to be supported.
Sure.
Now there's a pause and there's a second piece to this.
Mm.
Now, because we also work with communication, behavior, and personality pieces, and we use those as diagnostic tools in a variety of certain places in organizations. We then take that and say, look, how is Fred's communication styles different than mine?
Mm.
And how do I need to connect better to enhance clarity, to enhance levels of support for Fred?
Mm.
And we use that insight to do that. So it's kind of like a dance if you think
Mm.
about it, right? You have one partner facing up to the other partner. And it's not about who's leading who in the dance, but
Mm.
it's about they've one person steps forward, the other person steps back, right? And they move together. And it's the same concept
Yeah.
with our teams. Once we know them on a personal level, we start to begin to recognize behaviors and trends, and
Mm.
that helps us determine how we could connect with them more accurately so
Mm.
that they feel better supported.
Mm. Amazing. I, you got such amazing amount of knowledge. I can just keep on talking to you on so many different topics of
Thank you.
leadership. My next question for you, Rob, is how can leaders proactively identify and address burnout in their teams?
Yeah. So I did a piece or I did a podcast a while ago with my wife on this topic. And
Mm.
one of the things we want to do first, in my opinion, is we want to determine, is this burnout a reflection of the organization and the system?
Hmm.
Or is this a burnout a reflection of the individual? And
Mm.
there's no doubt everything ties together, right?
Yeah.
They're not exclusive of each other. But sometimes we experience or observe elements of burnout
Mm.
due to low quality self-talk
Mhm.
and the nature of the relationships where
Mm.
someone may not be burnt out at work
Mm.
truly. but because they've been around enough people talking about that, they
Mm,
adopt that and integrate that as a part of their practice.
mhm,
Whereas on the organizational side, if you have that cultural, those greased gears, we could have these open and honest conversations and check-ins to say, hey, how are you doing? And we
mm,
encourage that, right? So one of our tenets is for Black Rivers, vulnerability does not equal weakness.
mm,
And over the years, certainly older generations know this, right? We were taught just the opposite, right?
mm.
Don't be vulnerable, people take advantage of you.
Yeah.
Well, what we do as it relates to burnout, as it relates to stress, mental health, is we
Mm,
work with clients to structure their staff meetings in a way that normalizes these conversations,
mhm,
that actually takes pause. We begin with checking in with people to see where they are in terms of their energy
mm,
and enthusiasm. And we encourage our leaders to reflect, look, we've been grinding at this for months now, and I'm
mm.
running out of gas. How are you all doing?
Yeah.
And by them opening up that conversation, it will begin to illuminate these areas that are contributing to some levels of burnout, whether that's
Mm,
system or personal levels. But it also, it also is kind of therapeutic,
mm,
and it helps it pass through the people,
mm,
pass through the group to acknowledge, like, look, we're all in this together.
mm.
And because we're in this together and committed, we're going to support each other and just finish up this project. And then we can take some time to pull back and
Yeah.
relax or
Yeah.
redesign. But without those relationships, without
Mm.
that openness and psychological safety, how do you ever get to this space of care?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I also wanted to get your perspective on how professionals who may feel overworked and underappreciated, how can organizations foster a culture of recognition
Mm,
without without it feeling forced or artificial?
yeah. This is an entire conversation in a podcast in
Yeah.
and of itself, because if we look at the research that relates to motivation, the self-determination theory research, the concept of recognition is actually not highly endorsed because it's a form of external motivation. And what we're
Mhm.
trying to do is minimize external motivators, extrinsic, and try to focus more on intrinsic.
Mm.
So I think part of the answer is in the question you asked. And I'm going to start with this. Words are difficult. Words are tricky.
Mm.
Words are often the things that divide us. Even
Mm.
though our hearts might be aligned, it's the words, it's the lack of the vocabulary and the language that contributes
Mm.
to that. So when we ask employees, and we've done this in this institution I'm in right now, how they're feeling as it relates to this very question,
Mm.
they would say, look, we're not getting paid enough, or we're not feeling appreciated enough. It's important to actually break that down and determine, what do you really mean by this?
Mm.
Because
Mm.
from my work and my investigation into these claims, they're often tied to issues of low levels of psychological safety. I sound like a broken
Mm.
record here. I keep coming back to this, but that's one of the elements that creates the symptom, this appearance that we are not being recognized enough.
Mm.
Um, but to me, the answer is in the question and the words you used, where it's not about recognition.
Yeah.
Didn't you use the word appreciation in there?
Mm. I did.
And those are different things, right?
Absolutely.
And so showing people appreciation, I think, is a um, much more, well, gosh, I'm going through models in my head
Hmm.
that we've built. It's closer to intrinsic motivation. It's
Mm.
what we call aligning with people,
Hmm.
and it's validating people. And
Correct.
that is very different than recognition.
Mm.
And so there's time and place for recognition, and some people need it more than others. But also, if people are needing it more than others, it's tough for leaders to do this, but it's a time to step back and reflect on what's actually going on in that person's life.
Right.
that's that's
Right.
that's this is the result of that. This is a need that's not fulfilled. And so
Mm.
once again, it could have nothing to do with work. But I think the key here is not recognition, it's signs of appreciation,
Mm.
and having those as frequent parts of your interactions. Right? One of the things people don't feel appreciated about is because they're not getting attention.
Mm.
And so one of the easiest ways leaders can fix this is by having regular one-on-ones. For
Mm.
some organizations, that's weekly. For
Yeah.
some organizations, it's monthly.
Mm.
Monthly is way better than never, right?
Mm.
And in that time, we integrate feedback pieces. I call them drips, so
Mm.
that the employee can provide me feedback, which I realize is tough in some environments, but also I provide them feedback, both in
Mm.
good and bad. But
Mm.
that's where our opportunities for appreciation can
Mm.
exist.
Amazing. Time for a few more questions. With
Ah,
AI and automation disrupting industries,
mhm.
what leadership skills do you believe will be most valuable in the future?
It's going to continue to be this humanistic view, right?
Mm.
AI is similar to some extent of, say, the cell phone and what the
Mm.
cell phone's done to people,
Yeah.
right? It's
Mm.
the cell phones allowed people to A, maybe think less, and as well as just think about this, the irony of this. We have a phone that's a little computer, so you and I can talk,
Yeah.
but we never pick up the phone to talk. Instead,
Mm.
we have these really linear transactional messages through text, right? And
Correct.
so AI is going to shortcut things like that for us,
Mm.
which doesn't mean it's good,
Mm.
right? Like,
Mm.
so people are losing, and we're seeing this consistently about younger generations losing the ability to develop empathy, connection,
Mm.
eye contact, stuff like that, because the inadvertent consequence of the technology is teaching them that they don't need to do that, that there's
Mm.
workaround.
Mm.
But I think the leaders are going to continue to have to demonstrate a sense of humanity and
Mm.
connection for people.
Mm.
Because when people are connected and the work is not just transactional,
Mm.
it's it's integrated, it's people are being creative and generative, then we do better work.
Mm.
But some of these tools make it and even just remote working with Zoom,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It just changes the nature of the interaction.
Mm.
And if the leader's not being mindful of that,
Mhm.
it's going to take on a new life in and of itself.
Mm. Amazing. Two more questions for you.
Sure.
Um, you worked with companies across various industries.
Mhm.
What are the most forward-thinking workplace trends you are excited about?
Ah, it's the ones where actually our best clients are demonstrating this. It's this partnership with experts such as us,
Mm.
where they're acknowledging that they have their toolkit, they have their framework, but in the culture space, they need to
Mm.
do better and they need to integrate.
Mm.
And companies have been doing this forever with so many other areas, right?
Yeah.
Marketing, sales. And so now we're starting to get a little bit more traction with that. So
Mm.
it's part of it is this integration of best practices or better practices.
Mm.
I think the companies that are going to be served well over time are the ones that can really embrace the humanity of individuals and then the
Mm.
aspects that relate to organization. And
Mm.
this is central to return to work and hybrid work and these pieces is that we could still have 100% remote work, but we still need to navigate that space in a way that people are showing up as their best selves, but also that they're an active part of the team,
Mm.
that their remote work from their home or wherever is just not about taking care of their own needs, right?
Mm.
That they're still a part of a greater system. And so that's there's going to be this need. There always has been this need. It's
Mm.
just shifting now because of the climate
Yeah.
and technology that we build more future-proofed, agile teams based around some very simple, common cultural components.
Mm. Amazing. And my last question for you, Robin, this is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation, a lot
Uh-huh.
of them being young entrepreneurs or young leaders. What advice would you give to a young leader or a young startup entrepreneur stepping into a management role in today's complex work environment?
Yeah. I would, we all have to start somewhere, right?
Mm.
And we can't just change things for people
Yeah.
because our wisdom today, you and me have this
Mm.
wisdom today that's entirely based off of that life journey, right?
Mm.
So we have to recognize that that is a limiting factor for those young professional entrepreneurs. But something they could do is have a voice
Mm.
and request or demand or insist on certain levels of mentorship
Yeah.
from leadership groups, right?
Mm.
There's a lot of our leadership knowledge occurs through osmosis, right? We see
Mm.
things and we try to avoid them, or we see things and we want to replicate them or emulate them. But but if we don't have people that have wisdom and expertise on our side to support us, to
Mm.
help hold us accountable, to help us think through our questions and thoughts,
Mm.
we're kind of on an island by ourselves. So, and
Mm.
this happens a lot with very talented leaders at all levels. If you don't have that appropriate level of integration
Yeah.
with leaders and support, you just you don't know what you don't know in that environment.
Mm.
And so, for young entrepreneurs, for new entrepreneurs, things like that, I ask lots of questions. One of the things I encourage people to do is when they're job searching and they're accepting an offer, negotiate some of those terms
Mm.
for mentorship,
Yeah.
for development.
Mm.
And the other piece of advice I'd say is just be curious and have an open-minded approach to things, right?
Mm.
Just because you got this role doesn't mean you've arrived, right? You and I
Absolutely.
both are still continuing to grow and
Mm.
develop every
Correct.
day. And
Correct.
and and that's what they need to do. And then from there, meet people, talk to people, be warm, be engaging. There's all these different little small little tactics they can do to position themselves to be better off. And just like I said, curiosity is such a key to this
Absolutely.
process.
Absolutely. This is the first time I've ever heard and such sensible advice on negotiating something that you want to join. And we say that negotiate a mentorship for
Yeah.
yourself. And that is such
Yeah.
powerful advice. No young person ever thinks of that. It's primarily
No.
what are my financial terms. But on that note, Rob, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me. This has been a conversation that is filled with so much knowledge and so
Thank
much
you. I really
wisdom.
appreciate it.
We covered some amazing content and some amazing points on some phrases from you, which is, work should fuel the human spirit, not drain it. We spoke about the dynamic art of leadership. You talked to us about feedback equals love, accountability equals respect. Then you also spoke to us about the 5I engagement model. You spoke about culture, about AI, and some of the trends. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.